how come some people think hypnosis is dangerous? Where does this myth that hypnosis is dangerous come from? Hello, so happy to be here. My name is Flavio. If you and I have met before, welcome back. If you and I have not met before, I would hope that by the end of this video, you would think highly of it enough to perhaps subscribe to the channel, give us a like on the video, and hopefully even share it with other people who may be interested in the topic that we're going to discover today. So, quick story, I was at a book fair this weekend. The latest book I published has to do with the use of hypnosis for healing. So it was interesting to interact with the public and entertain questions and answer questions and also find out what people are thinking, what's going on in their minds. It was a very interesting experience. A lot of people express fear of hypnosis. So after I spoke, people came up and asked me, is hypnosis dangerous? And some other people who were there listening asked me an interesting question. Well, how come some people think hypnosis is dangerous? Where does this myth that hypnosis is dangerous come from? Before we get into this question, let's realize that everything in the world can be dangerous if misused. Did you know that you can, water, and I'm not talking about drowning, but drinking too much water can be toxic. We call this water toxicity. A lot of marathon runners, they would drink so much water thinking that they have to hydrate, and they would collapse because, it's too much water becomes toxic. So it's interesting that everything in the world can become a problem if misused. It's interesting, a knife can be a very dangerous thing, but we can also use it to prepare food and so forth, to protect ourselves from beasts in the wild. And a surgeon can use a knife, a scalpel, to perform surgery. But we don't think of surgery as being, there are risks associated with surgery, and we all accept that there are risks, but we don't think of it as being some pernicious thing that a surgeon would do to harm us intentionally. There are risks associated with surgery, but we don't think those risks are intentional. In fact, we do know that people go to school, they train, they prepare for many years to be able to minimize risk. So to say that there are no risks to hypnosis or to the use of hypnosis in a therapeutic context, because I'm now referring to what we call stage hypnosis, where if you think about it, in the case of stage hypnosis, the actual entity that the stage hypnotist is serving is not the subject being hypnotized, but the group, the audience. In other words, we're there to serve the audience and get a laughter out of the audience. And so in that case, the stage hypnotist is not primarily concerned about the emotional well-being of the person being hypnotized. They're primarily concerned with creating a good show for the audience. And I'll be honest with you, in some cases, at the expense of the emotional well-being of the person or people being hypnotized. Many people do not do stage hypnosis. They are what they call hypnotherapists. They only use hypnosis for therapeutic purposes, for the purposes of improving the quality of one person's life or a group of people's lives. I'm one of those people. I'm a hypnotherapist, not a stage hypnotist. And although the phenomenon of hypnosis is the same or it's common, the use of it is quite different. It's no different from saying that a knife can be used for surgery in the hands of a surgeon, and it can also be used to do all kinds of other things. So hypnosis is a tool. Now, when it comes to the skillful use of hypnosis for therapeutic reasons, then the question is it dangerous? Is it bad? And if not, as a lot of hypnotists would explain and claim, the question is, where did this reputation come from? Where did this idea, this mythology that hypnosis or hypnotherapy is so bad come from? I haven't really encountered that much lately. I mean, I've been practicing hypnotherapy for 27 years. But like I said, I was somewhat protected for most of this time because I was associated with a school of mysticism and mystical arts, and the people in that community typically are really open to hypnosis. They crave hypnosis. They like hypnosis because they associate that with deeper meditation. But when you consult, when you expose yourself to the public at large, as I was this weekend at a book fair, the question comes up, well, is it bad? Is it dangerous? No, 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 this is really bad. People have, in some cases, some people have a strong reaction against hypnosis. And the question is, how come? Well, like I said earlier, a lady asked me, and the first thing that I answered is something that I've articulated this thought on many, many occasions in classes, in articles. It's what we call, or what I've called, the cat is out of the bag syndrome. It's a very difficult thing to come to grips with. Because look, let's suppose that I want to go see a conventional talk therapist for my weight, for my excess weight problem. I'm excessively heavy, I eat too much, and I go see a person for that. We're going to be discussing things like blood sugar control and molecules in the brain and dopamine and how the brain does this and how the brain does that. And the villain in a lot of those conversations becomes the brain, the neurotransmitters and the chemicals in the body, and it has nothing to do with I. It has everything to do with a defect in this other thing that is not I, that we call the body. In a lot of these therapies, particularly nowadays in the age of neuroscience, and correctly so, put the entire blame of the problem on this entity that we call the body. Now you gotta ask yourself a question: what is the body if not a robot that we inhabit, that we use, that we wear? Look, nowadays, in the old days, mystics used to explain this, and it was very convoluted explanations. Nowadays, all we have to do is to refer to movies like Avatar, and if you're familiar with that movie that became really popular, you understand what we're talking about. Well, we kind of manufacture this biological robot, and we do that biologically in our mother's belly, but what comes out of the belly is basically a robot, right, that has its own biology, its own functions, its own things, but someone has to inhabit that. Someone has to run that. Someone has to use that body. And that someone is this thing that we call the I, this entity, this I. And to claim that the I has nothing to do with what happens to the body is a little bit questionable, because we're continuously training the body a certain way. Neuroscientifically speaking, biochemically speaking, we're continuously training it. We're continuously educating the body. For instance, by engaging in a particular behavior repeatedly, we are creating connections and synapses. So we're creating an easier or higher probability of that behavior happening again. We call this a habit, eventually an addiction if it's undesirable, right? So to say that the I has nothing to do with the body is a little bit complicated. So in conventional therapy, we discuss a lot how, and I know this because I go to conventional therapists all the time, currently, in fact, and there's a lot of, wow, you have this condition, if I have this condition, where did I get it? Well, you're born that way. Well, can we cure it? No, 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 you are that way. That's just the way you are. You see, if that's just the way that I am, then there's not much I need to do about it. There's really no responsibility there. I just have to learn how to manage the condition I happen to be born with, or the characteristics I was born with. In hypnotherapy, we don't think of it that way. Even if we're born with a particular condition, we don't think that birth is the beginning, because if a person is hypnotized over and over, they'll realize that, dude, we existed inside of our mom's belly. We existed before our mom's belly. We existed in so many different ways. And that's uncomfortable, because we begin to realize that our biggest problems, our biggest enemies, we're not really victims. We have a lot to do with what's happening to us, with us, for us in this particular lifetime or this particular experience. So there's a difference between going to a conventional talk therapist to address weight problems, let's say, and saying, well, the molecules in my brain make me overeat. All right. Versus saying, you know what, I'm a glutton and I have this problem and and it's very, very different, because here's what happens in true hypnotherapy. The hypnotherapist doesn't tell you what's going on with you. We don't. We hypnotize you and you say what's going on with you. And so, look, I was telling a lady at the book fair yesterday, if you go to let's say to any kind of counselor, doesn't matter what type, right? And they say, oh, you have a problem with this, this, and this, and this. If you disagree with what the other person said about you, you can always say to yourself that this person is crazy, this person has no idea what they're talking about, and you can walk away feeling kind of unscathed by that person's comments. But what happens if I simply hypnotize you and ask you what's going on, and you tell me what's going on with you? Oh, I actually hate my father, I actually despise, whatever, right? I'm making this up to make it dramatic. Well, now you said it, I didn't even know. I had no idea that you hated, in this example, that you hated your father, or that you hate your, whatever the case might be. I had no idea. You said it. And when you are hypnotized, you are aware of what you're doing. You know what you're saying and you know what you're expressing. So what's really incredible about it, and what creates this thing, is that we feel exposed. That's why I call it the cat is out of the bag syndrome. In other words, it's like, okay, what do I do now? If I express tendencies, proclivities, desires that I'm uncomfortable with, then I cannot say that you told me that and that you're crazy, because in reality, I said so. So people in hypnosis say all kinds of things that they later go, how could I possibly say that? Well, you said that because that was inside of you somewhere. Now we have to continue the process and incorporate that and accommodate that and see how to live with those things and how to change those feelings. But you said it, it's inside of you. So to a certain extent, this would be comparable to a person who's... so one of the theories of hypnosis is, in fact, this theory of inhibition, right? Which is what happens in alcohol usage. So let's say that a married man proposes a romantic interlude with a married woman at a party, but he's drunk, let's say, right? So he got drunk, so he goes to his boss wife and he says, would you like to go have sex tonight? And then everybody finds that to be scandalous, and they call security, this is horrible. And then somebody comes over and says, oh, come on, give him a break, he's drunk. And everybody says, okay, fine, he's drunk, let's just forget about it, okay? Go to sleep, we'll talk tomorrow. Tomorrow morning he comes over and says, look, I'm really sorry, I don't really mean it, I was drunk last night, would you just let that go? Sure, we'll let it go because you're drunk, no big deal. Now, some people would let it go at that. Some other people would say, wait a second, what this guy said when drunk represents what he really wanted to say, but he wouldn't dare to say because his inhibition, his sense of decency, his sense of logic, his sense of reason prevented him from saying that. What alcohol did, people would say, is inhibit that. In other words, remove the brakes. And now the guy expressed what he really wanted to express. This theory is common. People would commonly support that idea. Maybe not everybody, maybe not you, but this is a common idea about it. One of the theories about hypnosis is exactly that. It's not exactly the same as being drunk. There's no after effect. You don't feel drowsy afterwards. You don't have to sleep it off or anything like this. But one of the theories is we remove inhibition. So if I really secretly hate my neighbor, but don't dare to say it to you because I'm a pastor and I shouldn't hate anybody, in hypnosis, I could say to you, dude, I hate that son of a bitch, you know? Right? Do you see the point I'm making here? Because we're no longer inhibited by what we think we should say. And so people in hypnosis say all kinds of things that were where before they said it. They were inside of them. Now, who do we hypnotize therapeutically? The person who does not have a dysfunction, the person who does not have a problem, are those the ones who come to us and pay us to be hypnotized? No, the people who come to us and pay us to hypnotize them are the people who have some type of dysfunction, some type of limitation, whether it's weight loss, smoke cessation, whatever the case might be. But there's a problem there. And where do you think the problem comes from? The problem comes from the chokehold, from that strangling, from that emotion that was tied up inside of them that they couldn't find a way to express and deal with. What hypnosis does is it allows the person to express that stuff so that then later we can discuss this and the person, him or herself, will find a resolution to that feeling, and that's how the problem eventually goes away, whatever the problem was, whether it's weight, smoking, whatever the problem was. Does that make sense? So why does hypnosis, hypnotherapy have this reputation? The biggest reason why is because people in hypnosis say all kinds of things that they are uncomfortable with in their normal minds, and then they discontinue the process. Because look, it is no different from any parable, right? You start your therapeutic intervention here, you go through a really dark place, you express all kinds of things that you don't even agree with, but you said them because they were inside of you and they were affecting you. Now we have to resolve that conflict, and you're going to be much better than you were before. That was the whole point of the therapy. But if the person quits down here, right after they expressed some type of thing that to them is absurd, then they'll feel disturbed. And then they'll say, oh, I went to a hypnotist and you know what? I felt worse after the hypnosis than before. I said, okay, how long did you do your therapy for? Oh, I had one session. Okay. Have you ever heard of any legitimate therapeutic intervention that happened in one session? No, but they told me hypnosis is really quick. Well, yeah, it can be quick, but one session. So all you really did is you opened the Pandora's box. And instead of praising the fact that it took one session to open the box as opposed to 5 years talking about the same thing over and over, to then finally say that you hate your neighbor, right? In other words, you did the whole thing in one session. You should be so happy that you didn't have to waste 5 years. But instead, people run away because they said what would have taken them 5 years to say in a conventional talk therapy. I'm making up the numbers. I'm not suggesting that the ratio is one session to 5 years. I'm attempting to make a point here. But many people would walk away at that point. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this guy made me say that I hate my neighbor. No, the guy didn't make you say anything. The guy hypnotized you and asked you what the cause of the problem is, and you said that the cause of the problem is that I hate my neighbor. Again, hating my neighbor is an example that I made up. I love my neighbors. It's just an example. So, do you see the point I'm making? So, cat is out of the bag syndrome. Once I said that, oh my gosh, I said I hate my neighbor. Now, hating my neighbor is some very minor thing that I said. What people say in deep hypnosis is much much less sanitized, if you can imagine what I'm saying. You know, it is tough, man. You know, sometimes we do sessions and we, you know, it's a heavy, we do some heavy lifting as a hypnotist because we deal with the stuff that comes out of the person. We don't put anything in, we deal with what comes out, right? Because it has to go somewhere. Energy is energy, right? And what we do is we kind of open the door and let it come out, and it has to go somewhere. There's a story in the Bible, to give you an idea, where Jesus approaches a man who's possessed by a demon, and the demon says, look, you know, don't torture me. And then he sees a herd of pigs, and the demon says, okay, let us go into the pigs. And what's interesting about that parable, regardless of whether or not you believe in the Bible, has nothing to do with this, but the point is that the so-called demon had to go somewhere. It couldn't just be nowhere. If it's going to come out of the man, it has to go somewhere. And demon might be a strong word, and I'm not suggesting that people who come to hypnotists have demons. I'm simply explaining that the energy that the person expresses goes somewhere, and somebody has to deal with that energy if the person is in fact to be freed from their own afflictions. So don't ever be afraid of your hypnotist. Your hypnotherapist is only there to help you become a better person. And all we do is we help you relax so that you can understand what the problem has been, so that we can discuss this later, resolve it, and the quality of your life will consequently improve. Hope this helps. And if it did, please share. And I would love if you would consider subscribing to the channel and even liking this video. Thank you. I'll see you next time.